Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and another awesome episode from Drone Camps. I'm Justin Davis, your host, and today we're looking at something. This is the LT105. It is a 105mm quadcopter, and it has brushed motors on here, which means they are not quite as powerful as the alternative, which is brushless. So let's talk about the characteristics of this quad and what it's all about, and kind of who it's for. And we'll talk about some good points and we'll talk about some bad points. Now, this quad is very similar to some of the other ones out there, like the QX90. We've had quite a variety of brushed quadcopters come through my shop in the last year or so, and I've had a lot of fun with these, mainly because they have programmable flight controllers on here, and that is what makes these extra special. And they also have an all-in-one camera system on here for your FPV experience. You can fly these line of sight, but where the real fun starts is when you're FPVing these. So this one has a few additions to it over top of some of the older ones. The early days, and I say the early days, this was probably like 6 months ago for some of these brushed quads, maybe a year ago. They didn't have beepers on them. They weren't programmable. Some of them had fixed flight controllers so that you only had stability mode, and that was about it. But for the scale at the time, a year ago, that was actually a lot of fun. And even a year ago, you still did have some of these programmable boards with clean flight and beta flight on them, but they weren't quite as mainstream yet. So now they're kind of getting into the mainstream, and things are changing. So with this one, the LT105, it does have clean flight on this one. It doesn't have beta flight, at least my version doesn't. Very, very cool that it does have a beeper on board. You can see it right there underneath the frame. It's well protected, and rubber bands are what's going to hold this battery on. It comes with a 600 milliamp 25C battery, Aurora RC. It looks like that same company that maybe makes that Aurora brushless quadcopter that I showed here on my channel, mine that got killed by the wet grass. But this is running on 1S, and this one flies really nice on 1S. It's extremely fast. So if you're thinking about not buying a brushed quadcopter because you want a micro brushless, I wouldn't really let these type of motors stop you from getting one of these, because they fly really true and they fly really fast. So it's a little different style flying. You have to sort of calculate what you're going to do next. If you go way up high and come down really fast, you have to be ready for that to throttle out and punch out. But let's talk about some of the components on here. We have full carbon fiber frame, which is totally awesome. And you have these wires that are protected underneath the motors by these little motor guards here and sort of landing gear. During my flight test, one of them popped off and I wasn't able to find that. So that's kind of a bummer, but if that happens to you, you can still fly it, resting the battery on the bottom down here. I don't know, you could probably put the battery on top maybe, but you risk kind of hitting the wire here coming between the props there, unless you somehow run your battery wire through this hole right here, but you don't really have to do that. Also has an F3 flight controller on here. Like I said, it does have clean flight, totally programmable. And if you're looking to learn how to set this up with your transmitter, this one also has an FrSky receiver on here. So guys that have Taranis Plus or any type of Taranis, it will work with a Taranis radio. If you want the version that works with Spectrum, DSM2, DSMX version is available with no receiver on it, so you can add your own satellite DSM receiver on there and bind it up with your Spectrum. If you're looking to get information on how this quad will work and bind up with your transmitter, I have a complete video on the same type of quad on my channel already, and I'll try to post that link to that video at the very end of this video for you guys to check out, because it is a little bit of a complicated process to get the motors to arm. Some guys can get the motors to arm. Just a couple tricks that you need to do. One is that the throttle trim switch has to be all the way down to 0. So zero out your trim on your throttle, and that will help arm the motors. And you also have to go into the CLI and type in a command code that sets the motor rate, PWM motor rate for these brushless motors. And until you have that done, the motors will just turn on and stay on. It's kind of strange. But like I said, always take the props off indoors when you're first playing around with these in clean flight and trying to get it set up, because it might fly off your bench on accident on you, because the motor rates, the PWM in the CLI isn't quite set up out of the factory. So I'll post that video coming up for you. Now, it does have a pretty decent camera on here. The camera spec is 500 TVL, sort of a mid-range style FPV camera. I was using it yesterday and it was a little overcast, and I just turned the brightness up a tiny bit on my goggles, but this camera actually looked really good, and I'll share some of that footage with you coming up. It is an NTSC camera, and now also flight time on these are awesome. You get like 5 minutes flight time versus like a tiny whoop you're going to get like 3 minutes. Some people are getting close to 3.5 with those, but I feel like 5-minute flight time on these, they're so cheap. You can buy quite a few of these. I'll post a link to these down below as well. Now, while this quad is small enough to fly indoors and also really extremely fast outdoors, outdoors you're going to get around half a football field away with this. I was able to fly all the way across a pretty big parking lot before I lost signal from my radio. And by the way, if you're new to this, this is an ARF. So what ARF means is an acronym for almost ready to fly. That means you have to add your own radio. And like I was telling you before, it supports a variety of different radios. Also, it supports PPM and SBUS. This particular version that I have has an FrSky micro receiver on here. Take the top off there and show you that little receiver right there, and back here is the bind button. To bind it up with your Taranis, you just simply put your Taranis in bind mode and hold this button down in the very back and plug in your battery at the same time, and eventually this little blue light right here will turn solid and you'll have a nice bind on there. Also, here's the beeper right here. The camera is wired up to the board through these two wires right here, and there should be a signal for the video wire as well going to the board. Like I said, you can change this from PPM to SBUS if you want. Also, if I remove this receiver right here, just show you this board a little closer, it also supports 2S. So there's two pads right next to this black chip right there that you're going to bridge with solder. This looks like right now it's an okay solder. It looks a little dark. It should be a lot lighter to have a nice solder. But if I bridge these two pads right here, I can make this thing run in 2S. And it's labeled right here. You'll see right next to this arrow, it says 2S. So if you pull up a schematic of this board online on the internet, on Google, you'll see that. And this would be an awesome quad on 2S. I really think this one would be a lot of fun on 2S. And also, guys, if you're trying to bind this up to your Taranis Plus, make sure that you have it set to D8, because this is an 8-channel receiver on SBUS, and it is set up in RX, serial RX inside the configuration. The configuration in the ports channel inside CleanFlight is already set up for this, so right from the factory, you shouldn't have to switch any of those switches inside CleanFlight to get this to work with your radio. Once it's bound up, you can go into CleanFlight and you'll see the channels moving around in the receiver menu section of CleanFlight. And also, it comes from the factory set up in stability mode, so it's not going to have horizon mode on there or acro mode, so you'll have to add those modes inside CleanFlight. And like I said, guys, that video on the T1 and the T2 that I have on my channel shows you exactly how to work with the same style quad. They're all relatively the same with this brushed flight controller on here, this little F3 flight controller. Now, also in the box, you get a prop remover tool, and this is nice because this goes right underneath the prop, and instead of pinching these with your finger and possibly damaging the motor stem, these motor stems are very sensitive, so you just slide it underneath and you push up and the prop should come right off for you without damaging the prop. Or you can just pinch and hold the motor and pull these off, but if you damage these, they aren't super expensive to replace. You'll just have to solder, let's see, 2 wires back onto the board. And I believe, I'm not sure if I'm going to get this right, but I believe these are the counterclockwise motors, the white and black cord there, cables there, and then the blue and red are the clockwise, I believe. I could be wrong. It might be the opposite, but I believe I do tell that in that T1 video. Now you also get some extra rubber bands, and you get 2 sets of props, which is cool because you always need extra rubber bands and extra props. And in all my crashes in my flight test, I was flying into playground equipment, and I bent the prop underneath the frame one time, but I didn't even bend a prop or break it. So these are pretty decently durable props in my field tests. Now this little guy right here, this is a charge lead for your 1S battery, and this is pretty cool because if you have a little standalone charger like something like this, you can just plug it right into the side here, into the battery terminal here, and plug in your battery. And this one doesn't come with the charger, it only comes with that lead, so you'll need some type of a charger. But if you have one of these ISDT, this is the SC620. This is a 500 watt charger. And yes, I do want to unbalance charge because there is no balance port on this. This is a 1S battery. We don't have to balance multiple cells. And now let's charge them with that lead that comes along with it. Pretty nice. Now, my final thoughts and opinions on this LT105 is the fact that, first off, this is $50 for the receiverless version. So if you want to add your own little micro receiver on here, you can get those micro receivers for about $10 on the GearBest site. And it works on PPM and SBUS. If you're using FrSky transmitter, I believe you could use some sort of FrSky SBUS transmitter receiver on this, and it should work just fine. DSMX should work also for Spectrum and Taranis Plus version. If you already have a micro receiver that you wanted to put on here, like the AC800, I'll try to list a few micro receivers down below in this video. But for $50, $49.15 I think it is right now on their site, that's a pretty decent deal to get a little micro quad that you can fly in acro outdoors, or in stabilized mode indoors. It can still be a lot of fun. You can set up little gates indoors and have fun since the weather's so terrible out right now. So that's about it for this quad, and these are a lot of fun. They're very similar. Like I said, again, that JJ Pro T1 and T2, very similar. I've seen a lot of these different designs, various different frames, and sort of the same components on a lot of these frames, so they are pretty universal to set up, pretty easy to work on, and quick to repair if you have a problem, or if you have something burn out on it. It's probably a $10 fix, unless you burn out your camera. That might be $15 to $20 depending on which camera, but you can replace this camera and everything on the quad, so it makes it a nice value for a lot of fun. So anyway, guys, thanks again for hanging out on the bench, and before we leave you, let's go outside and enjoy some flying with this little LT105. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you on the next one.